What's up, everybody? My name's Jack, otherwise known as the Avid Assistant, and I've been making these videos on YouTube as the Avid Assistant for a while now, on tutorials on how to use Avid, how to do assistant editing, ingest, script, sync, online turnovers, all kinds of different things. And one of the ways that started for me was helping out people on the Avid Users of Facebook page, where people often post errors or problems they're having, or issues that they've ran into with Avid or their computer or machine or something during editorial that's stopping them from continuing. And they'll post it there, and there's countless different very experienced users and different people, as well as Avid support staff, who can offer assistance. And so I was on there quite a lot, and I would see somebody post a problem that I've seen before because I've run into the same issue before, and I would send them the solve as to how I solved it last time I saw that. But after a while of helping people this way, you kind of notice two things. The first being that the same issues come up again and again. And secondly, that the same small handful of fixes and solves will work about 85% of the time to cover most things. And so that's what we're going to look at today, is the most common fixes and solves for Avid when it's not quite working properly, to get you back up and running again as quick as possible. 8.5 times out of 10. So let's take a look. Right, now solve number one is relaunching Avid and restarting the machine. And yes, I can already hear a lot of people getting frustrated at being asked,
have you tried turning it off and on again?
But it is just the most logical first step to try, since it's quick and it's easy, and it does work a lot of the time for anything hardware and software related. It's not just Avid. Turning it off and on again is, a really good fix, just from cycling power, clearing caches, all kinds of things like that. And it can fix a lot of really basic stuff, so it's worth a shot. Solve number two is recreate your Avid user settings. Right, now your user settings, or your user profile, is like a user in a computer. It is your user profile within Avid that stores all of your user-specific settings. So your customized keyboard, your interface settings, your bin settings, your export settings, composer settings, and a whole bunch of different ones. There's quite a few. And while these user profiles are really, really great for customizing the application, they are very prone to corruption in a variety of different ways. If you've used the same settings for a long time, they can become corrupt just from interacting with different kinds of projects. If you're going between versions, it's very highly susceptible to becoming corrupt, since a lot of these settings and how they're built within Avid, in order to add new features, these have been changed since your settings were created. And so some of the things your settings are pointing to very specifically aren't in the same place, so they don't exist, as well as a number of other ways which your settings can become corrupt, like going between different machines, for example, that are configured differently. The important thing to note here is that your Avid user settings are prone to corruption, and when they do become corrupt or buggy, this is what results in a lot of buggy Avid behavior, sometimes crashes, or tools not working the way they're supposed to, like the trim tool or something like that. If you're experiencing any kind of weird, unusual, buggy behavior with your Avid, the first thing that I would suggest you try outside of a restart is to recreate this user profile. So you can do this by going to your settings panel and then clicking on where your user profile is and creating a new one. Now, I'm not suggesting right away that you go about rebuilding your whole user profile right away, but it is a very good test to try to at least isolate the problem. If, say the trim tool wasn't working and it wasn't behaving correctly, then you would go create a new user profile and then try that same function right away. If it worked with a fresh user profile, completely clean, then you can go about starting to rebuild it with all your customization. And for all you Avid users that have your very complex, custom keyboards and things, and you're groaning at the idea of having to rebuild your user profile, don't worry, you can import settings from the old user profile into the new one. Now, the very wise among you will be wondering, won't that bring over the corruption from the old user profile into the new one though? And yes, that is highly possible. And so that is why I only recommend doing this for your keyboard and bin frame views, because these are things that are pretty solidly reliable. The settings within there between versions and between systems, they don't really change much. And so bringing over your keyboard from the old one and bringing over, like bin views is a fairly safe thing to do. So before we move on to our next Avid solve, here's a demonstration of how you would port over your user settings from an old profile to a new one. So if you're within your settings window of the new user you have just made, and you're looking to port old settings from your old user profile, then with this window up, go to File, Open Setting File, navigate to where your old settings are, and then inside the folder of your old settings, just select the XML that will be in that folder and hit Open. With that opened, you will get another window that is essentially all of the user settings of your old user. And you can drag and drop these settings from this window over into your new one. But again, I would only recommend doing this for your keyboards, your custom keyboard that you'll have made, and your bin views. Number 3, recreate media databases. Now, if you're having trouble linking to media, and when I say linking to media here, I'm not talking about linked media, I'm talking about media within Avid's Avid Media files, especially on a drive where maybe you inherited it from another editor or something like that. But at the same time, you are confident that all the media is there. It should be there, but it's maybe showing up as offline, or Avid's having trouble relinking to parts of the media. Then refreshing your media databases is your first port of call, since it's going to rebuild Avid's database as to what media is in the Avid Media Files folder, allowing it to better link to all of it within your project. So this can be done in 2 ways. The sort of soft way to do it is by going to the File menu, Media, and then you can refresh media directories there. But failing that, there is what I'd call a hard refresh by going into your Avid Media Files folder and then going into your numbered MXF folder. If you don't know which one it is, the media in question is in, then you can just run a search within this folder for .mdb, media database, and then all of the files, all the MDB files within Avid Media Files will show up there, and then you can just delete them all. Don't worry, as long as all these folders are named for numbers, so as long as you haven't renamed them with any letters in the name, they're just numeric, then next time you launch Avid should scan all of these folders and recreate all of those MDB files. And since they'll be recreated fresh on your system, Avid will have a better grasp of all the media that's in there. But again, I'll reiterate, this Avid Media Files folder has to be on the root level of the drive, named exactly like this, spelled like this, then within there, a folder called MXF, then within there, just numbered folders. So just numeric. Once you've got a successful scan and it's perfectly linked and working, you can rename these folders if you like, but just note that by renaming them will disable Avid's ability to scan them if you add new media to it or the media changes or anything like that. So just, be aware. Now, while we're on the topic of sort of linking to media, I've got another kind of related tip here. So we'll call this number 3.5, which is Relink Settings. So I'm going to show you my relink settings here. And this is the settings that I use every single time I have to do a relink. And it pretty much works for me, guaranteed just about every time. Now, this has relied on your Avid Media having been prepared properly and transcoded with metadata correct in order for relinking. You like to refer to this as commonality. I've got a whole video going through that whole process and how it works in Avid. It's actually the most popular video on the channel. I call it the Proxy workflow in Avid Media Composer. So if you'd like to know more about that, then you can check out that video. It will be linked below. Linker! But if you're working on an established production, high-end TV or film or something like that, then the DIT will have done this for you. Then with that information known, here's my process going through my relink window and what I would set at every turn and why, for a bit more of a stable, happy relink experience. So media on drive, I generally leave to all available drives, but in my home system, I'm always using my main RAID called Falcon Bay. And so if I know all the media is on there, I can hit that. It's just going to narrow the search and it's got less media databases to scan through, which is the next step here on load media databases. You generally want that ticked. That means when you first hit OK down here and it starts doing the relink process, it's scanning through all of those MDB files we talked about earlier to check the catalog of all the Avid media that's available to Avid at the moment. So you need to load all those media files. So you can load the media files of just one specific drive or all available drives at any given time. The only advantage really to selecting a specific drive, I think, is if you have many drives connected and then it won't take as long, it won't have quite as many media databases to scan through. Otherwise, just leave it to all available drives. Relink only to media from the current project, I always have unticked. This is because a lot of my media is transcoded in DaVinci Resolve. If you have media that's been transcoded by a DIT or anyone like that, then yes, there's a good chance that the project attached to that media will be the name of the Resolve project or whatever app that they have used to transcode the media. Even if Avid was used by the machine room, the MCR room at the post facility, they might have used their own Avid project that has a different name. So relink only to media from the current project will only relink to media that's been transcoded or ingested in this specific Avid project. So I always have that unticked. Selected items, all open bins, is a different method of relinking that I mostly save for relinking sequences, particularly if I'm ever doing the conform at the end of a project. Relink by, now this is our main sort of section here. So the two things that we want to relink by is timecode and then our commonality, which, you know, if long-time viewers of the channel have heard me refer to a lot. So timecode, start timecode, I'll just always leave it to that, since, you know, all of our files have timecode, even if it's 0000, it's still timecode. Source name, I will enable whatever is the commonality that has been used. So generally, whenever I'm doing the transcodes, it'll do it in DaVinci Resolve, and so then it'll be the tape name is what I'm using. So I'll have this set to tape name or source file name. That's what I always have ticked there. So then it's comparing the tape name or the source file name and the start timecode from the clips you're relinking to you know, what it's got available to it in the Avid Media Files folders. No, I'm not going through everything here. You know, there is the target if different to original, there's ignore extension, ignore characters after last occurrence. There is other options here, which I do use for other purposes, but not relinking, and so I'm going to speed past it just now. So match case when comparing source file names, I just think, again, this is adding a bit too much specificity and filtering out certain options, so I always have that unticked. The same goes for just underneath that of video parameters. Relink to current project format only. I don't understand why that's the default, especially since, you know, your transcodes in your media could be anything. So I always have this set to any video format. It should be set to anything. Just relink as long as my tape name and the start name match. Those are the only two specific properties that I want it to filter out other media from. Otherwise, look at all of the media. Now, one reason why you might want to do this is if you had potentially made multiple transcodes, or if you have the source media managed by Avid here as well, and you want to relink from the 1080p to the 4K one, or vice versa, in which case you might want to pay attention to that setting. But for my purposes, this is what I'm always using. And then with that selected, this is exactly what my relink window looks like whenever I have to use it for a general relink purpose. Now, I know we're talking about Avid MXF transcoded media here, but if we were trying to relink some linked media, what I would do is select the clip within Avid. You can see that's linked media there. Then go to a relink and select linked media instead. This is a relatively new function, but it allows us to essentially just point directly to where the media is on the drive. So we just go locate media, find where it is on the drive, point to it, and then we can tell Avid to link directly to it. Happy days. And speaking of linked media, that brings us nicely into solve number 4, which is clearing out the AMA metadata folders. Every time you link to media in Avid, it's keeping cache files of where that media is on the drive, what AMA plugin is used to link to it. Don't worry, we'll come back to AMA plugins in a bit. Details on the metadata of the drive of the files, the resolution, all of that jazz, bunch of data on the files. And over time, these build up. And if your AMA metadata and management folders get really, really, really big, as they sometimes do if you're linking to lots of media, it can become a problem eventually, leading to some unwanted behavior when linking, or actually the most common issue I see related to this is if Avid hangs on startup. So it might start up eventually, but just take a really long time and hang at a certain point during the initialization process, or it might just hang there completely and just not boot up. But if you notice that where it's hanging, you'll see at the bottom of the window when Avid's booting up on the splash screen, it tells you each part of the application that it's initializing. If you notice that it says this during the startup,
initializing media streams manager,
then this is most likely your culprit. And luckily for us, this is a very easy solve. It's very similar to refreshing our media databases. All we have to do is delete the AMA management folders and then relaunch Avid, and Avid will recreate these when we have to link to our media. So if you find yourself having this issue, here's what to do. Go to the following file path. I'll leave it up here for a few seconds so you can see it and pause the video and, copy the file path. And then go to the folder labeled AMA Management, and then down one more folder in there to AMA Metadata Folders, and then delete all the contents in there. This is all of your AMA metadata files. And if you haven't done this before and you're feeling a bit uncomfortable about deleting files within Avid's file structure, you can just move these out into a temp folder somewhere, like a temp folder on your desktop. You could just dump all these folders there that could be put back if it puts your mind at ease. But when you relaunch Avid after moving or deleting all these files, Avid should begin to recreate these when you start dealing with the linked media. So some of it might not link, as I said, back exactly correct. You might need to relink them or even potentially link them back in again. But it will stop Avid hanging on startup because there's a lot less files that it has to then cache in when it's booting up the application. And speaking of Avid's hanging and getting stuck, I've met many users complaining of issues with Avid Media Composer being slow, in particular with AMA or GUI performance on the timeline, and especially when they started to have effects. And a lot of these users, not all by any means, there is a lot of genuine cases out there that, there's issues that need dealt with, but there's a number of these users who have told me that the amount of RAM that they have in their machine is as low as 4 gig sometimes, or sometimes 8 or 12. And it's very important to remember the minimum spec requirements for Avid Media Composer. And yes, this also applies to Apple Silicon systems. I've met some users who seem to believe that the configuration and the architecture of the Apple Silicon systems means that they don't need as much memory. But my view would definitely be in the opposite direction. Since the Apple Silicon architecture, the system on a chip, it's a unified memory that's acting as both the graphics memory and the system RAM. So, it's having to do 2 jobs. So I would think you would need more memory. I can tell you I've got 96 gig in my M2 Max system, which I'm well aware is overkill, but I was trying to future-proof a little bit, but it absolutely works a treat. So if you find yourself you're having some hanging issues and slow, particularly loading larger projects, and you are on 16 gig or less RAM on your Avid, definitely consider upgrading the RAM if you can, if that's a possibility for you, or the machine if you have to. If you're on Apple and they don't let you upgrade your RAM, just because I think these days, and we're going into bigger projects and bigger media, a lot of the times even the bare minimum system requirement doesn't always cut it. Right, now solve number 6 is deleting the MC state file. Right, now this is going to be a kind of similar setup to our media databases and our Avid AMA management folders. We're going to be deleting an Avid file and then relaunching Avid and getting it to recreate it. But just so you've got a bit of info on this, the MC state file does more or less exactly what it sounds like. It preserves all the information of the state Avid was left in when you were last using it. So a lot of users will have all their bins open, then they'll hit Command Q and just quit Avid. And shut it down there. And so the MC state file will remember which user profile was open, which bins were open, which sequence was open, the whole state Avid was in when it was last being used, so that it can then bring it back to that state upon its next launch. But occasionally this process of trying to relaunch Avid and go back to that state with all of those tools in the same place does cause issues and can cause Avid to crash, and can cause it not to stop, or it can cause other kind of buggy behavior. Particularly if you've maybe had to force quit, or if Avid crashed and it wasn't able to save all that data correctly. So this is a good go-to fix for a lot of different instances or bad Avid behavior or crashes. And all you need to do is close Avid and delete the MC state file, which can be found in 2 places. Inside your Avid user profile, here at this file path, as well as inside the application program files, here at this file path. And once you go and delete these files and relaunch Avid, The program will open clean and fresh. Probably all your bins will be closed, your tools and sequences will be closed. You'll just need to reopen those. But the MC state files will be recreated in the background, all clean, all happy, and all non-corrupt. And so that is definitely a very good one to note, and one that's suggested for fixes by Avid Support quite often. Right, number 7 here is opening your Avid project with all bins closed. Right, now this one is very similar to our previous issue here, but this is more related to an issue you might have where if there was a corrupt sequence or bin, like there's an issue with one of the actual Avid bins and the data contained within, and you're trying to launch the project, but the last time the project was open, that bin was open. So say, for example, Avid crashed while you're using a sequence. You're scrubbing along the sequence. Maybe there was a power cut. Maybe there's an issue with the system. Maybe there's an issue with Avid. Point is, it crashed and Avid unexpectedly closed while it's writing data to that bin. And this bin has become corrupt. Then when you go to relaunch Avid, Avid's trying to reopen that project with all of the bins that were previously open, but it's having issues and it's not actually getting into the application. Avid won't even start sometimes if there's a completely corrupt bin that was open last time, because it's trying to open that and it just finds it can't open up the project and it causes a crash on startup. If this is the case, what I would suggest, if you happen to know the bin in question, is to remove it from the project within the Finder or File Explorer, and then go to your Avid Attic, replace it with a backup of that bin, the most recent one, and relaunch and go from there. But if you had a whole number of bins open and you're not sure which one is the offending bin, then I would hold the Option key or the Alt key if you're on Windows when you open the project in Avid, when you actually go to open the project, and this will open the project with all the bins closed. So this is essentially ignoring the MC state and just opening up the project with every bin closed, and then you can take it from there. And so then the bin that you find that you can't open or you have issues opening is the offending bin, and then you can swap that out. In fact, this little trick has got me into a number of stubborn projects over the years that had closed their doors to me, so to speak. Right, now solve number 8 is porting your bins. So if you're finding navigating through the project and opening and closing bins and folders and things like that is becoming kind of slow and laggy, then a really good thing to do that will, refresh this and liven it up, at least for a while on really big projects, is to create a brand new Avid project with the same, resolution and frame rate, and then copy the bins, just the bins, into the new one from the old one. So an Avid Media Composer project is a folder, and with a whole bunch of bins contained within that folder. And so if you copy just the folders and the bins, but don't copy anything else, like search data or caches or the AVP file or anything like that, just the bins and folders, then you'll essentially have that project clear and fresh. It's like dumping a whole bunch of cache files or the automatic files that Avid's creating in the background for that project that's weighing it down a little. Whenever I've been a first assistant in post on particularly larger productions, particularly sort of long form TV productions, but on a few feature film projects as well, we always made sure to do this on a monthly basis. We recreated any and all Avid projects we were using and ported our bins over. And this just helped keep a better user experience in general. So definitely always a good one to try, both as a fix for laggy experience, as well as sort of preventative maintenance once your Avid project gets quite big and has lots of bins and sequences. Right, now on that note, the rest of our solves here are going to be more preventative in nature. So this is things you'll do ahead of time to prevent buggy behavior. And so for our first one, number 9 here, is checking your AMA plugins. So if you're trying to link to Avid Media and you're finding that Avid can't link to the media to bring it in, since the official Avid way of ingesting media is to link and then transcode, or link and consolidate. And if you're finding that Avid can't bring in the media, so say this is Red Cine media, for example, then there is a very strong chance that you don't have the AMA plugin installed. Or maybe you've moved to a new Avid, or the Avid's been reinstalled or something like that, and that this plugin's been lost and it just needs to be installed again. It's the first thing to check. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what AMA plugins are, they're essentially Avid's way of maintaining support for different video file formats and codecs. So rather than Avid constantly having to monitor the industry and all the different camera companies and manufacturers for proprietary codecs and things like that they may or may not be making, and then license them and make support into them, Avid's put the onus on camera manufacturers to create what they refer to as AMA plugins for Avid. So camera manufacturers like Sony, Canon, Red have all made plugins for Avid which will enable native support within Media Composer for linking in their media. The majority of them are free, but there are some fantastic third-party plugins like the Media Reactor plugins, which allow all kinds of additional import and export functionality. I'll also have a link in the video description if anyone's interested to a Google Doc that I've made that I use for my own purposes, where I try to roughly track all of the different currently supported formats of ingesting and exporting out of Avid Media Composer and categorizing them via importing and linking. So if you want to know how to get a particular file format into Avid, and it's one I haven't used in a while, I'll refer to that document and then I can bring it in. So I'll have a link to that as well, open for anyone to use if they wish. Right, number 10, check your Avid and operating system are compatible. This is a really big one that a lot of people don't consider. So first off, I'm going to say that any machine that you use for work, any machine that you think you're going to have Avid Media Composer installed on, or really any software you're going to use for work in any capacity, really, I would always have automatic update disabled. And then whenever a new update is available, your operating system will likely inform you of this. Apple's particularly very pervasive of letting you know. And then the first thing that I will do is I will check if the software that I regularly use and depend on, so in my case, Avid Media Composer, if it supports that new OS update. So in the case of Avid Media Composer, Avid has a web page called the Avid Documentation and Version Matrix, which lists for the current version of Avid all the different operating systems that are supported on that and the exact version you can go up to. So this isn't a case, for example, for Mac users of just supporting like macOS Ventura or macOS Sonoma. It might only be that it supports up to a specific version of Sonoma. So, for example, I believe at the time of recording this video, Avid supports Sonoma 14.3. So the 14.3 series. It doesn't support up to 14.4 or higher yet. Now, that's not to say that there aren't users on 14.4 that are running Avid perfectly fine. That may be true. But in terms of official Avid support, what they have tested and certified the application to run on, we are up to 14.3 as of Avid Media Composer 2024.2. Now, while this is definitely something that Windows users should also be doing, I'd say this is probably more of an issue for Mac users in general. This is because macOS has an annual update, a big annual update and change to macOS, where they introduce a whole bunch of new features and new things. And with new features comes new architecture. And with new architecture comes new changes that Avid has to make in order to support that and to continue to run. And, in general, I like to always stay about 1 year behind in macOS updates and releases, just for safety. But when Avid qualifies it, I will generally move up on my home system. But if I was running a facility, I would probably always stay 2 years behind in terms of operating system, for the sake of Avid's version OS compatibility. Trust me, you always want these to be playing nicely with each other, because you might find that you're having all kinds of buggy issues with Avid. Maybe Avid won't even launch, and you've tried all the previous steps, the previous things we talked about, and Avid still won't launch, or you're having all kinds of issues in the UI, and you're blaming Avid and you're reporting bug fixes and stuff, but it's actually due to an issue that's been introduced, say, by Apple in a macOS update. But again, if you need any information on which version to be on for Avid, for comparing with your machine or your OS, always check the Avid Documentation and Version Matrix. There will be a link to that below. But if you're dealing with older versions of Avid Media Composer, as in not the current one, maybe a version or two back or anything previous to that, I would find a much better website to check would be Chris Bove's website. I deeply apologize, Chris, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I've only ever seen it written. But Chris's website is just utterly amazing. It's laid out visually very, very nice, and has different pages breaking down which versions of Avid are qualified and compatible on which versions of macOS and Windows, going back many years to older versions. So it's a really good thing for Avid technicians, people in facilities, or even if you're at home and you're now working remotely and you're running your own Avid, it's definitely a good page to have bookmarked to reference. I've referenced it many, many times, and continue to be thankful and grateful to you, Chris, for providing us this resource. Right, number 11, clean installs. And I've had some slack for doing this. I've caught some slack from people before for advocating this and for doing this, from Premiere users or users of other applications, that it shouldn't be necessary. But I don't like to update my Avid or install my Avid from something like Avid Link, because when the software is installed, it's installing all kinds of different support folders and files all across your operating system and your computer, okay? And then when you move to a different version, or you have to do a reinstall or anything like that, you don't want the old ones left over when you're installing the new ones. And so I always like to do a clean install. So my steps for doing a clean install of Avid Media Composer are the following. Firstly, I like to export my user settings somewhere. I usually just throw them on the desktop since this is temporary, and I'll show you why we're doing this in a bit. This is an absolutely essential step, but it's just so that we can quickly access them and we know where they are. Second, I will run the Avid uninstaller. This is installed automatically whenever you install Avid. It will be on your system, and this will do a clean uninstall of Avid and its current iteration on your system. Then, rather than going through Avid Link, I will go to Avid's website, either through the Download Center or through My Products page, and download the version of Avid that I now want to install. Now, if you're just reinstalling the same version and you still have the installer from last time, then you can just run the installer from there. I do keep all of my installers, I never delete them. So this step is just essentially sourcing the installer that you need. So either through Download Center, My Products, or from your own archive. And once you have this, of course, run that installer. And lastly, upon installation, when you first launch Avid Media Composer, I always create a new user profile. So every single time I install a new version of Avid, or a new installation of Avid, or when I go from one computer to another, or actually as well, every time I start a new project, I create a new Avid profile. Now, using the steps that we showed earlier in the video of porting your keyboard and bin views and things like that over into the new user profile, this shouldn't really take you very long, and it's just a really good care and preventative measure to keep Avid running at its absolute best. So at the beginning of every project, and especially definitely whenever you're installing a new version of Avid, I would always recommend a clean user profile. In fact, I actually like to have the version of Avid Media Composer in the name of the user profile that I'm installing, as you can see here. Also, while you're at this, if you have any plugins, so like AMA plugins or Blackmagic Desktop Video, for example, and you're updating your Avid and you haven't done it in a long time and you're leapfrogging to a newer version and something like that, I would check if there's any updates for these plugins as well, since particularly with things like Blackmagic Desktop Video, this can often cause issues with Avid's compatibility with these, breakout boxes. If the software that runs those and the current version of Avid Media Composer aren't compatible. So if you're leapfrogging to a newer version of Avid, make sure that you've got the compatible version of that. I will also note here as well, before we move on, that it is important for these plugins to have Avid installed first. So if you're going to install a version of, let's say, Blackmagic Desktop Video or a plugin like this, have Avid installed on the system first before you install it. So, and one reason for this is Blackmagic Desktop Video, particularly, for example, it is the one installer for all your different NLEs. And when you run the installer, it checks which NLEs are installed and then only installs like the component of Desktop Video for those NLEs. It doesn't install it for all of them off the bat. And I suspect the reasoning is for this is because it has to place some files within Avid's existing folder structure or Premiere's existing folder structure. So if you didn't have Avid installed and then you install Desktop Video and then Avid, it might not work and show up. You have to install Avid Media Composer first, then your plugins. And lastly, number 12 is get support. Of course, the above steps don't cover everything, but they will cover all of the most common issues that plaguing Avid Media Composer users, and these are the most common fixes. But it won't cover everything. So, in the event that you've tried everything above and it's not worked for you, then by all means, seek out support. There's multiple different places you can go to get support. For anything not urgent, I tend to go to the Avid Users of Facebook group. This is a really, really good group with many, many experienced users on there, myself included, who will all help you, in any way that we can. And because there's a very high member count, I think it's above 20,000, and there's members all around the world, you do usually get a response fairly quickly. And not to mention that the moderators of this Facebook group do work for or with Avid, and so they are able to provide, special support for things like, say, licensing. So if you're having an issue with your Avid license or something like that, your Avid link's not working and it's not letting you load Avid Media Composer to jump in because it's saying you have to have a license key and you've tried putting yours in but it's not working, they should be able to help you out. But like I said, there's numerous different places you can go to get Avid support. The next one that I would mention after that is the Avid community pages. This is a series of web pages online that Avid have made full of articles and forums written by Avid support staff and highly experienced users. Here you can ask questions about any of their products in the forums and you can get a response fairly quickly from them. And you can talk to people who are having the same problem and how they're fixing it and stuff like that, as well as some really great articles that people will put up there. And failing that, of course, you can go the official routes to use your Avid support plan and log an issue online. So just go to your Avid account, click on Avid support, and you'll be navigated through to their Jira style IT support system where you can log an issue. And I found that this works quite well. I've never really had to use this and not had my issue solved in the end. You can log here the urgency of the problem, like if it's preventing you from working and things like that, and then they'll usually get back to you fairly quickly. And I've always personally been very, very happy with the experience that I've had with Avid support there as well. And of course, there's phone numbers for different regions, which I can't test to. I've never actually used the Avid phone line support, but it's there and it's another support resource that you have available to you if you have a support plan. Now, again, in the video description, I will have links to the Avid support page, the Avid Users of Facebook group, and the Avid community pages as well down below. So you can check out any of those if this video hasn't helped you with your issue and you still need some help and support. And there you go. That is my most common tips for getting Avid Media Composer back up and running. If all users worked their way through these common fixes first before reaching out to Avid support, then it would solve a lot of cases. And that would both help us Avid users out because we'd be able to get back to work a lot faster, as well as freeing up more of the Avid support staff to focus on the more complex and unique situational support cases. And I say this as someone who's contacted support, had several emails back and forth when one of the above fixes was the ultimate solution. So yeah, next time I have any kind of issues, I'm going to be sure to remind myself to work my way through this list before I contact those guys, because that was a little bit embarrassing. Now, as for all you guys watching, I really hope that you found this useful, and if you'd like more Avid and editorial info like this, then there'll be a suggested video for you on the left, and you can hit the like and subscribe button to check out the rest of the channel and be notified when there's more videos on here. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Avid Assistant is signing off.